I stood in front of the rusted gate, rain soaking through my coat and seeping into my bones. The skeleton key trembled in my hand as I stared at the overgrown property before me. My brother Christopher's words still echoed in my mind like a wound that wouldn't close. "You've always been useless, Rachel. A burden. This lot suits you. It's forgotten, just like you." While he had inherited our father's prized beachfront mansion, 5 bedrooms with panoramic views of the Atlantic and a pool that seemed to belong in a movie, I received what everyone believed was a worthless, vacant lot off Route 27, a property so insignificant that the family had forgotten it even existed. The rain intensified as I pushed the key into the ancient lock, half expecting it to snap off inside. But when the gate creaked open and I stepped through the overgrown brush, I froze in disbelief. There, hidden behind layers of ivy and decades of silence, stood something that shouldn't exist. A secret estate, a hidden piece of my father's heart, and inside its sealed walls, the truth about why he had divided the inheritance the way he did. I thought I had been discarded, but in that moment, I realized I hadn't been forgotten. I had been chosen. My father's funeral was exactly as he would have wanted it, dignified, understated, and mercifully brief. Edward Lawson had never been one for excessive displays of emotion, and the service reflected his character, practical, composed, and without unnecessary flourish. The funeral home was filled with business associates rather than friends, which said everything about how my father had lived his life. I sat in the front row, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my black dress still carrying the scent of the department store where I'd hastily purchased it 2 days before. Beside me sat my daughter Lily, 16 and solemn, her hand occasionally finding mine when she sensed I needed strength. 3 seats away, as if proximity to grief might be contagious, sat my brother Christopher and his wife, Vanessa. He hadn't cried. Not once. Instead, he'd spent most of the service checking his watch and whispering to Vanessa, who nodded with practiced sympathy whenever someone important glanced their way. "He looks good," an elderly woman told me during the reception, gesturing toward the open casket where my father lay. "So peaceful." I nodded. Because what else could I do? My father didn't look peaceful. He looked like a wax figure of himself, the angles of his face too sharp, the color of his skin too uniform. Death had taken away the slight furrow between his brows that had been there for as long as I could remember. "Rachel." Christopher appeared at my elbow, startling me. "Henry wants to speak with us. The reading is tomorrow, but he wants to go over some procedural matters now." Henry Collins had been our family's attorney for 30 years. He was waiting for us in a small room off the main hall, his silver hair combed neatly back, his face bearing the same expression of controlled sympathy he'd worn at my mother's funeral 15 years earlier. "Rachel, Christopher," he said, motioning for us to sit. "I wanted to speak with you both briefly before tomorrow. Your father was particular about certain aspects of his will." Christopher straightened his tie. "I'm sure it's all straightforward, Henry. Dad and I discussed the estate planning extensively." Henry's eyes flickered to me briefly before returning to Christopher. "Edward wanted me to emphasize that the reading tomorrow is to be attended only by the 2 of you. No spouses, no children." "That's ridiculous," Christopher said. "Vanessa has as much right—" "Those were your father's explicit instructions," Henry said firmly. "And there's one more thing. He asked that you both come prepared for surprises." "What kind of surprises?" I asked, finding my voice for the first time. Henry closed his briefcase. "I've already said more than I should. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock at your father's study. Please respect his wishes." After he left, Christopher turned to me. "Do you know something I don't?" I shook my head. "Why would I? You were the one who handled business with Dad." "Right," he said, his voice clipped. "You were too busy playing nurse." The word stung, but I'd grown accustomed to Christopher's jabs. After our mother died, the distance between us had widened from a crack to a chasm. Where once we'd been inseparable as children, running wild along the beaches of Bridgehampton during summer breaks, now we were practically strangers who happened to share DNA and childhood memories. "I was taking care of our dying father," I said quietly. "Someone had to." Christopher's face hardened. "And I was preserving what he built, what he actually cared about." Before I could respond, Vanessa appeared, her black designer dress somehow making even grief look fashionable. "There you are, darling. The Mercer Taylors are leaving and want to say goodbye." Christopher nodded and stood. "This conversation is pointless anyway. We'll know everything tomorrow." As they walked away, I felt Lily's presence behind me. Uncle Christopher is still a jerk. I see, she said. I turned to face my daughter, taking in her dark hair, so like my own, and the determined set of her jaw that reminded me painfully of her father. He's grieving in his own way. Is that what we're calling it? She slipped her arm through mine. Can we go now? This place smells like old flowers and fake sympathy. I nodded, gathering my purse. On our way out, I paused at my father's casket one last time. I hadn't been able to say goodbye properly when he died. The hospice nurse had called me at 3 a.m., but by the time I arrived, he was already gone. Christopher hadn't even made it back from his business trip in Chicago. I placed my hand on the cold, unfamiliar one resting on my father's chest. Goodbye, Dad, I whispered. I hope you found Mom. The drive back to my modest rental house was quiet. Lily stared out the window at the passing landscape of Southampton, the manicured hedges and gated driveways of the wealthy, a stark contrast to our neighborhood of teachers, nurses, and small business owners. Do you think Grandpa left you anything? She asked finally. I sighed. I don't know, sweetheart. It doesn't matter. It matters if it helps us move out of, this shoebox. This shoebox has been our home for 8 years, I reminded her gently. And your grandfather helped when he could. My teacher's salary doesn't stretch as far here as it would elsewhere. I know, she said, sounding suddenly older than her 16 years. I just wish things were easier for you sometimes. I reached across the console and squeezed her hand. Having you makes everything easier. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Henry's words. Be prepared for surprises. My father had never been a man of surprises. He'd lived his life according to careful plans and calculated risks. Even his illness, aggressive pancreatic cancer, had been handled with military precision. Treatment options researched, second opinions sought, end-of-life care arranged. But in those final months, as I'd sat with him through long nights of pain and medication-induced confusion, there had been moments when a different Edward Lawson emerged, a man who spoke of regrets, of mistakes, of things left undone. I should have told you more, he'd said once, his voice thin and raspy. About your mother, about the choices I made. It's okay, Dad, I'd said, adjusting his blankets. You don't need to worry about that now. He'd grabbed my wrist then, with surprising strength for someone so diminished. Promise me you'll open it when the time comes. Open what? But he'd drifted back to sleep, or perhaps into one of those half-conscious states that had become increasingly common as the disease progressed. I never got an answer, and by morning, he seemed to have no recollection of the conversation. Now, staring at my bedroom ceiling as rain began to tap against the window, I wondered if tomorrow would finally provide the answer to a question I hadn't even known to ask. The next day dawned gray and humid, the kind of summer day that clings to your skin and makes everything feel slightly off-kilter. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences, professional but not pretentious. After dropping Lily at her summer job at the local library, I drove to my childhood home for what would likely be the last time. The Bridgehampton estate loomed at the end of a long, curved driveway, its white columns and expansive porches a testament to old money and careful preservation. My father had purchased it when I was 10, after his shipping business finally broke into the major leagues. I still remembered how my mother had cried when she first saw it, not from joy, but from something else I couldn't identify at the time. Now I wondered if it had been fear of what such wealth might do to our family. As I parked behind Christopher's gleaming Tesla, I noticed that someone had already begun removing personal items from the house. Several boxes sat by the garage, labeled in Vanessa's precise handwriting. Donate, auction, keep. The presumption made my stomach tighten, but I said nothing as I made my way to the front door, which stood slightly ajar. Inside, the house was unnaturally quiet. No staff moved about. No music played from the sound system my father had been so proud of. Just the hollow echo of my footsteps on marble. I found Christopher and Henry in our father's study, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather, and the cigars my father had secretly enjoyed despite doctor's orders. Christopher sat behind our father's desk as if he already owned it, while Henry arranged papers on the antique coffee table by the window. You're late, Christopher said, not looking up from his phone. I checked my watch. I'm 5 minutes early. Henry cleared his throat. Shall we begin? Edward was very specific about how this should proceed. We took our seats, Christopher reluctantly moving from behind the desk to join me on the leather sofa. Henry opened a thick folder and removed several documents. Before I begin, I want to remind you both that your father was of sound mind when he prepared this will 6 months ago. He revised it after his diagnosis, with full understanding of his prognosis and wishes. Christopher waved his hand impatiently. We know all this, Henry. Just get to the distributions. Henry nodded and began reading. The preliminary language was standard. Revocation of previous wills, appointment of executors, payment of debts. Then came the bequests. To my son, Christopher Edward Lawson, I leave the Bridgehampton estate at 478 Ocean Drive, along with its contents, and my primary financial portfolio currently valued at approximately $12 million. Christopher's face remained impassive, but I could see the slight upward curve of his lips. Not quite a smile, but the satisfied look of someone whose expectations had been met. To my daughter, Rachel, Ann Lawson, I leave the undeveloped property located at 1178 Wainscott Hollow Road, along with all its contents, and the sum of $50,000. The room went silent. I felt a strange buzzing in my ears, as if I'd been underwater and suddenly surfaced. $50,000 was generous, certainly. It would help with Lily's college fund. But compared to Christopher's inheritance, it was practically nothing. And what was this property? I'd never heard of it. Is that it? Christopher asked, looking almost disappointed that there wasn't more to discuss. Henry closed the folder. There are some additional minor bequests to charities, but regarding family distributions, yes, that is the entirety of Edward's will. I found my voice. I don't understand. What property is this? Dad never mentioned owning land in Wainscott. Henry reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope and a small box. Your father left these for you, Rachel. Inside is the deed to the property and some additional information he wanted you to have privately. Christopher laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the room. Dad left her the dump? He always knew she couldn't manage anything of value. Christopher, Henry said sharply, your father made his decisions deliberately and with great consideration. But Christopher wasn't listening. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the ocean view that was now his. Well, that's that. When can we finalize the transfers? The paperwork will take a few weeks, Henry said, gathering his things. I'll be in touch with both of you. I sat there, the envelope and box heavy in my lap, feeling strangely hollow. Not because of the disparity in our inheritances. I'd never expected equality there, but because it seemed so impersonal, so transactional, as if my father's final message to me was nothing more than a deed to an unknown piece of land. Rachel, Henry said softly, breaking into my thoughts. Your father asked me to tell you one more thing. He glanced at Christopher, who was now on his phone again. He said, tell her to use the key first. I opened the small box. Inside lay an old iron key, heavy and ornate, the kind you might find in an antique store or period film. Not a modern key for a modern lock. What does that mean? I asked. Henry shook his head. That's all he said. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful. After Henry left, Christopher turned to me, his expression a mixture of triumph and pity. Don't look so devastated, Rachel. Did you really expect more? You chose to be a public school teacher in a town where you can barely afford rent. Dad was just being practical. It's not about the money, I said, slipping the key into my pocket and standing to leave. It's always about the money, Christopher replied. That's what you never understood about Dad, about this family. It's why you'll always be the disappointing one. I walked to the door, then paused and turned back. Can I come by tomorrow to pick up some of Mom's things? There are a few photos in her recipe books that I'd like to have. Christopher's face hardened. Vanessa has already started cataloging everything. For the estate sale. If there's anything specific, email her a list and she'll consider it. Estate sale? Christopher, those are family heirlooms, memories. They're assets, he interrupted. And they're mine now. Like this house. Like everything Dad built. He gestured around the study. It's not your home anymore, Rachel. Don't make this awkward. You got what was yours. Now leave. The words hit me like physical blows. I turned and walked out without another word, my vision blurring as I made my way through the house where I'd grown up, the house that now belonged entirely to my brother. As I reached my car, the sky opened up, rain pouring down in sheets. I sat behind the wheel, not yet starting the engine, and finally opened the envelope Henry had given me. Inside was a deed, just as he'd said, to a property I'd never heard of. Along with it was a yellowed map, hand-drawn, showing the location off Wainscot Hollow Road. And beneath that, a note in my father's precise handwriting. Rachel, some treasures aren't meant to be seen by everyone. Some truths take time to be revealed. Use the key. Find what I couldn't tell you in life. Dad. The rain drummed on the roof of my car as I stared at those words, the old key now burning a hole in my pocket. Whatever my father had left me, it wasn't just land. It was a mystery, a final conversation, perhaps even a goodbye he hadn't been able to give in person. I started the car, pulled away from the house I'd never again call home, and headed toward Wainscot Hollow Road, toward whatever waited behind the lock that matched my key. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time I found Wainscot Hollow Road. It wasn't easy. The narrow lane didn't appear on my GPS, and I had to rely on my father's hand-drawn map, which showed landmarks that had clearly changed over the decades. What once had been Miller's farm stand was now a small organic grocery, and the red barn with white trim had been replaced by a modernist house that looked like stacked glass boxes. I almost missed the turnoff, just a gap in the dense roadside vegetation with a faded wooden post bearing the barely visible numbers, 1178. The dirt driveway was overgrown, branches scraping against my car's sides as I inched forward, wondering if I'd need to continue on foot. After about 50 yards, the narrow path opened to a small clearing, and I saw it. An ancient iron gate set into a crumbling stone wall that stretched in both directions, disappearing into the woods. The gate was covered in rust and ivy, looking like it hadn't been opened in decades. I parked and approached slowly, the key feeling suddenly heavier in my hand. It fit into the lock with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for me. With a grinding protest of metal against metal, the gate swung open. What lay beyond took my breath away. The overgrown path continued, winding through what had once been formal gardens, now wild and untamed, but still bearing the ghosts of their original design. Marble benches peeked out from beneath climbing roses, and a stone fountain stood silent, its basin filled with leaves instead of water. And there, at the end of the path, partially, obscured by mature oak trees and climbing vines, stood a house that shouldn't exist, a colonial-style manor with a grand portico and mullioned windows that gleamed dully in the gray afternoon light. What on earth? I whispered to myself, approaching slowly as if the building might disappear if I moved too quickly. The manor wasn't grand like our Bridgehampton estate. It was smaller, more intimate, its proportions more human. But there was an elegance to it, a quiet dignity in its weathered clapboard and hand-carved details. This wasn't just some forgotten property. This was a home that had been loved once. The front door was locked, but the key that had opened the gate worked here too. Inside, the air was still and heavy with dust and memory. Sheets draped over furniture created ghostly shapes throughout what appeared to be a formal sitting room. I moved carefully, pulling back one of the covers to reveal an Empire-style sofa, its upholstery faded but intact. Moving from room to room, I felt like an archaeologist uncovering a lost civilization. The dining room still held a table set for 6, crystal glasses dull with dust. The kitchen contained antique appliances from perhaps the 1950s, alongside older, more traditional elements. A pantry still held canned goods with labels so faded I couldn't read them. But it was when I reached what must have been a study or library that my hands began to tremble. Unlike the other rooms, this one showed signs of more recent use. The dust was less thick, and there were indentations in the leather chair behind the desk, as if someone had sat there not years but months ago. On the mantelpiece stood a row of framed photographs. I picked one up, wiping away the thin layer of dust with my sleeve, and found myself staring at my own face. 10 years old, gap-toothed and smiling, sitting on a garden bench with my father. A bench that looked very much like the ones I'd just seen outside. "I've been here before," I whispered, though there was no one to hear. I moved to the desk, opening drawers carefully. Most contained what you'd expect: pens, paper, old ledgers, but the bottom right drawer was locked. I tried the key on impulse, and again, it turned smoothly. Inside lay a single sealed envelope with my name written on it in my father's distinctive hand. Next to it was a smaller, more modern key labeled "Safe," with shaking fingers. I opened the envelope. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know the will reading shocked you. I ask only that you read this before judging me. The land I've left you holds more than meets the eye. It was your mother's sanctuary, the home we built before wealth and obligations stole our peace. I bought it back in secret and restored it for you. For your spirit, you gave me your time, your patience, your love. Not when it was convenient, but when it was hard. You cared for me, while your brother waited for me to die. I've watched you raise Lily with grace. I've watched you endure in silence. This inheritance is not a punishment. It's a gift of truth. Christopher got what he thought he wanted. You got what I knew you'd value. Roots, legacy, truth. In the safe hidden. Behind the portrait of your mother in the upstairs study is everything else. Accounts, trusts, and the deed to this property, already transferred to your name. You are not forgotten. You are everything I built this family on. Love, always, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, my vision blurring with tears that I finally allowed to fall. All these months of caring for him, of watching him fade, of wondering if he even knew I was there, and he had seen everything, understood everything, even planned for it. It took me 20 minutes to find the upstairs study, a cozy room tucked under the eaves with windows that would have offered views of the garden in its prime. The portrait of my mother hung on the eastern wall, younger than I remembered her, laughing in a sundress, her dark hair loose, around her shoulders. Behind it, just as my father had written, was a wall safe. The key fit, and inside, I found a stack of documents so substantial it made me dizzy to consider their implications. Financial accounts I'd never known existed. A trust established in my name with assets that made me blink at the figures. Property assessments for the house and land, recently updated. And on top, a handwritten note. For Rachel and Lily, no conditions, no obligations, just love. I sank into a dusty armchair, documents scattered across my lap, and let out a laugh that turned into a sob. Not because of the money, though the security it would provide for Lily and me was overwhelming, but because of what it represented. My father had seen me, truly seen me. When I thought he was lost in silence, or illness or indifference, he had been planning this final act of recognition. As the light began to fade outside, I realized I needed to pick up Lily from the library. I gathered the most important documents, locked the house carefully, and drove back to Southampton in a daze, the key now hanging from a chain around my neck. Mom, you okay? Lily asked as she climbed into the car. You look weird. I smiled at my daughter. I'm more than okay. I have something extraordinary to show you tomorrow. Is it about Grandpa's will? Did he leave you the good silver or something? I laughed. Or something. Let's go home. I'll tell you everything over dinner. That night, after explaining as much as I could to an increasingly wide-eyed Lily, I sat on our small porch with a glass of wine, watching the stars appear one by one. My phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. Hope you're not too disappointed. Vanessa is already talking to interior designers about the Bridgehampton house, moving in next month. I didn't respond. Some conversations weren't worth having anymore. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching what it would take to restore a colonial manor and its gardens to their former glory. The next morning, I called in sick to the summer school program where I taught English to struggling 10th graders. It was the first time I'd missed a day in 3 years, but this couldn't wait. After dropping Lily at her job, I drove straight to Henry Collins' office in East Hampton. His secretary tried to tell me he was booked solid, but when I mentioned my father's name, she disappeared into his office and returned moments later. Mr. Collins will see you now, she said, unable to hide her curiosity. Henry stood as I entered, his face unreadable. Rachel, I was wondering when you'd come. You knew, I said, placing the documents from the safe on his desk. You knew about all of this. He gestured for me to sit and close the door. I did. Your father swore me to secrecy until after the will reading. He wanted Christopher to believe he had received the lion's share. But why? Why the secrecy? The separate property? The hidden accounts? Henry leaned back in his chair, looking suddenly tired. Edward and I were friends for 30 years. In that time, I watched him make many decisions. Some I agreed with, some I didn't. But in this, I supported him completely. He tapped the stack of papers. Your brother sees wealth as power. Your father realized, too late perhaps, that this view had corrupted Christopher's character. And mine? I asked quietly. You, Rachel, he never worried about. You chose a career helping others when you could have taken a position in his company. You stayed when your brother left. You showed up. Every day. I shook my head, still processing. The house in Wainscot? He said it was my mother's sanctuary. Henry's expression softened. That was their first home. They lived there when they were first married, before the business took off. Your mother loved it. When success came and Edward wanted to move to Bridgehampton, she resisted. It caused tension. I don't remember living there. You were very young when they sold it. After your mother died, Edward tracked down the current owners. They had let it fall into disrepair. He bought it back about 2 years ago and had been quietly restoring it whenever he could slip away. I thought of all those afternoons when my father had been at meetings during his illness. Had he actually been at the Wainscott house working on this secret project? There's something else you should know, Henry said, opening a drawer and removing another file. Your father amended his will one final time, the week before he died. He added a codicil. What does that mean? It means there's one more condition, one that affects both you and Christopher. He slid a document across the desk. The Bridgehampton property comes with a stipulation. Christopher must maintain ownership and residence for a minimum of 5 years. If he sells before then, the proceeds are to be donated entirely to the Maritime Conservation Foundation. I stared at Henry. He can't sell it? He can. But he won't profit from it if he does so within 5 years. I started laughing. He has no idea, does he? Christopher and Vanessa were already talking about liquidating assets. Henry's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. I'll be informing him of this condition this afternoon. As I drove away from Henry's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because of Christopher's predicament, though I couldn't deny a certain poetic justice in it, but because pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving were falling into place. My mother's reluctance to leave their first home, my father's insistence on the Bridgehampton estate, the distance that grew between them until her death, my brother's gradual transformation from the boy who had taught me to skip stones into the man who could barely look me in the eye at our father's funeral. Money had shaped us all, in ways visible and invisible. I stopped at a garden center on the way back to Wainscott, buying basic tools, gloves, and some flowering plants. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The property, my property, would need far more work than I could do alone, but I could at least begin to reclaim the garden from wilderness. As I pulled up to the gate, I noticed something I'd missed the day before in the rain and shock of discovery. A small brass plaque, green with age and nearly covered by ivy. I pulled the vines away to read the faded engraving, Serenity Hall, where peace dwells and truth abides. Inside, I spent hours exploring every room more thoroughly, taking photos to show Lily, making lists of repairs needed, imagining what the house must have looked like in its prime. In what had been my parents' bedroom, I found a cedar chest containing linens monogrammed with my mother's initials. In another room, one that might have been mine as a small child, I discovered a toy chest with hand-carved animals and a mobile of fabric stars that sparked the faintest memory. By late afternoon, I had worked up a sweat clearing some of the more aggressive vines from the front of the house. As I stood back to assess my progress, the sound of tires on gravel made me turn. A sleek black SUV pulled up, and Christopher stepped out, his face a storm cloud. "So this is the worthless lot," he said, looking around with new eyes. "Henry told me everything. You must be feeling pretty smug right now." I set down my gardening shears. "I'm not smug, Christopher. I'm grateful." "Grateful?" He laughed bitterly. "You got the better deal, and you know it. This place, once restored, will be worth millions. And all those accounts? Dad played me for a fool." "That's not how I see it," I said quietly. "Dad gave us both exactly what we valued most. You valued the status of the Bridgehampton house, the portfolio, the appearance of success. I valued this." I gestured to the wild gardens, the weathered house, with its secrets and history. "And now I can't even sell the damn beach house without losing everything," he said, kicking at the gravel. 5 years in that mausoleum just to keep what's rightfully mine. "It's almost as if Dad wanted you to learn something," I said, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. Christopher stared at me, then at the house behind me. "You know what? Keep your lessons and your hidden treasure. I don't need any of it. I've built my own success. Without Dad's help." "We both know that's not true," I said softly. "But it could be, Christopher. That's the point." He turned back toward his car, then paused. "There was a time when we didn't hate each other, wasn't there? When we were kids?" The question caught me off guard with its vulnerability. "We built sandcastles together," I said. "You taught me how to swim. You let me win at chess sometimes." He nodded, almost to himself. "I remember." Then his expression hardened again. "That was a long time ago. It doesn't have to stay in the past," I said, but he was already climbing back into his SUV. As he drove away, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The hurt was still there, but duller now, more like an old scar than a fresh wound. My father's final gift hadn't just been the house or the money, it had been perspective. I turned back to Serenity Hall, my fingers brushing against the key that now hung permanently around my neck. There was so much work ahead. Repairs, restoration, decisions about my teaching position, about where Lily and I would live. But for the first time in years, I felt as if I was exactly where I was supposed to be, standing on my own ground, building something that was truly mine. Mom, this place is insane. Lily spun in a slow circle in what had once been the grand entryway of Serenity Hall, her eyes wide with wonder. It's like something out of a movie. It was Saturday morning, 3 days after my confrontation with Christopher, and I'd finally brought Lily to see her inheritance. The weather had cleared, sunlight streaming through windows that needed cleaning, but still managed to cast golden patterns across the wooden floors. It needs a ton of work, I cautioned, watching her explore. It'll take months, maybe years to restore completely. Lily ran her hand along the carved banister of the main staircase. But we're going to do it, right? We're going to live here? The hope in her voice made my chest tight. For so long, I'd tried to shield her from the financial stress of our lives. The careful budgeting, the declined invitations to friends' ski trips, the creative repurposing of thrift store clothes. I'd never wanted her to feel the weight of our limitations. Yes, I said, smiling at the joy that bloomed across her face. We're going to live here, but we need to be practical. The trust your grandfather set up gives us financial security, but we still need to be smart about how we approach this renovation. I can help! She was already pulling out her phone. I've been watching all these restoration videos on YouTube. There's this whole community of people who fix up old houses and document everything. I laughed. Since when are you interested in home renovation? Since about 3 minutes ago when I realized we own a literal mansion, she said with a grin. Come on, I want to see everything. We spent hours exploring, Lily documenting every room with her phone, already planning color schemes and furniture arrangements. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself seeing the house through new eyes, not just as a gift from my father or a symbol of my mother's past, but as our future home, a place where Lily and I could put down real roots. By mid-afternoon, we'd made it to the attic, a surprisingly clean and organized space compared to the rest of the house. Unlike the dusty, cobweb-filled storage area I'd expected, this was more like an archive. Cardboard boxes were neatly labeled: Edward, college, Anne, wedding, family photos 1980-1985. Grandma's name was Anne? Lily asked, examining the labels. I nodded, opening a box marked Rachel Baby. Inside were tiny clothes, a hand-knit blanket, and a journal with Rachel Elizabeth, Our Miracle, written on the cover. Elizabeth? Lily peered over my shoulder. I thought your middle name was Anne. It is, I said, confused. I opened the journal, recognizing my mother's handwriting immediately. March 15th, 1973. After 3 years of trying, countless doctors, and so much heartbreak, we're finally expecting our miracle baby. If it's a girl, we'll name her Rachel Elizabeth, after Edward's grandmother. If it's a boy, James Edward, after both our fathers. I flipped through more entries, detailed accounts of my mother's pregnancy, her hopes and fears, descriptions of how my father had painted the nursery himself, built a cradle by hand. Mom? Lily's voice pulled me from the journal. She had opened another box labeled Hospital, 1973. Inside were more papers, including a birth certificate. For Rachel Elizabeth Lawson, born April 30th, 1973, died May 2nd, 1973. My hands began to shake. This can't be right. Deeper in the box was another birth certificate. For Rachel Ann Lawson, born June 12th, 1973. Parents, Edward and Ann Lawson. Mom, what is this? Lily's voice seemed to come from far away. I kept digging through the box, finding medical records, letters, photos of a nursery. Not in this house, but somewhere else, decorated for a baby that never came home. And then, beneath it all, a letter, written in my father's hand, dated June 15th, 1973, addressed to my dear brother Richard. The adoption went through. The baby is ours now, legally and in every way that matters. Anne is already in love with her. After losing Rachel, I wasn't sure she would ever smile again. But this child, this gift, has brought light back into our home. The agency assured us the birth mother wanted absolute confidentiality, which suits our needs perfectly. As far as the world is concerned, Anne simply carried to term without complications this time. No one here knows about the loss of our first daughter. We've decided to name the baby Rachel as well. Rachel Anne. I know it may seem strange to you, but for Anne, it feels right. A way to honor the daughter we lost while embracing the one we've been blessed with. Please don't mention any of all this in future correspondence. As we agreed, this remains between us. Rachel is our daughter now, in every way that matters. I stared at the letter, reading it over and over as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. I wasn't their biological daughter. I was adopted, named after their first child, who had lived only 2 days. Mom, Lily's voice finally broke through. She was holding my arm, her face pale with concern. Are you okay? I looked at my daughter, my biological daughter, and felt a strange doubling of reality. I'm not sure. We brought the boxes downstairs to the library, spreading the contents across the large table. More letters, more journals. The fuller picture emerged slowly. My parents' long struggle with infertility, the joy of finally conceiving, the devastation of losing their baby girl just days after birth. Then, through connections at my father's church, word of a young woman from Boston who wanted to give her baby up for adoption, the private arrangement, the decision to keep it all secret. So Grandpa wasn't really your dad? And Grandma wasn't your mom? Lily asked, trying to process it all. Biologically, no, I said, still feeling as if I were floating outside my own body. But in every other way, they were my parents. They raised me. They loved me. I paused, realizing something else. And Christopher isn't my biological brother. Does Uncle Christopher know about any of this? I thought back through decades of family dynamics, searching for clues. I don't think so. There's nothing here to suggest. They ever told him. The weight of this revelation settled over us as the afternoon light began to fade. I was 52 years old, discovering that the foundation of my identity had been built on a story I'd never been told. Are you going to try to find your birth mother? Lily asked as we carefully repacked the boxes. I hadn't thought that far ahead yet. I don't know, maybe. These records are old, and it sounds like she wanted privacy, but perhaps there's more information somewhere. Do you think that's why Grandpa left you this place? Because he felt guilty about keeping the truth from you? It was a perceptive question, one I'd been asking myself as well. I think it was more complicated than guilt. I think he wanted me to know the whole truth, but he couldn't bring himself to tell me while he was alive. This was his way of making sure I'd find out eventually, on my own terms. That night, after we returned to our rental in Southampton, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother, Anne, and whether she had ever wanted to tell me the truth, whether my entire relationship with my parents had been genuine or built on secrets and compensatory love. But when I closed my eyes, what I remembered wasn't doubt or artifice. It was my mother teaching me to bake bread in our kitchen, my father patiently helping me with math homework, the pride in their eyes at my college graduation, the way my mother had held my hand when I told them I was pregnant with Lily and that her father wouldn't be in the picture. Those moments couldn't be faked. Whatever their reasons for keeping my adoption secret, their love had been real. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would continue restoring Serenity Hall, not just as a tribute to the parents who had raised me, but as a home for the future Lily and I would build together. And somewhere in that process, I would decide whether to search for my birth mother, to add one more piece to the puzzle of my identity. We need help, I announced, over breakfast. Professional help with the house. I'm going to call some contractors today to get estimates. Lily looked up from her cereal. Are you okay with all of, what we found out yesterday? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm processing it, but I'm still me, Lily. Finding out I was adopted doesn't change who I am or how much I love you. If anything, it helps me understand some things better. Like what? Like why family has always been so important to me. Why I've worked so hard to give you stability. I think somewhere deep down, I always sensed there was something I didn't know about my origins. I smiled at her. And it explains why I look nothing like Christopher. That made her laugh, breaking the tension. So when do we move? That depends on how quickly we can make at least part of the house livable. But I'm thinking by the end of summer, if we push. Before school starts? Seriously? At least the basics. A functioning kitchen, bathrooms, a few bedrooms. The rest we can work on gradually. Lily's face lit up. I can't wait to tell Zoe and Mackenzie. They're going to freak out. Maybe don't mention the found out I'm adopted at age 52 part, I suggested dryly. That's a bit heavy for teenage gossip. Duh, Mom. She rolled her eyes in that perfect teenage way. I'll just tell them we inherited a cool old house that we're fixing up. It's still pretty amazing. As Lily headed off to meet friends, I made a list of calls to make. Contractors, an architectural historian to help ensure we preserved the historical integrity of the house, a landscaper to assess the overgrown gardens. The tasks were practical, concrete, a welcome distraction from the existential questions still swirling in my mind. My phone buzzed with a text from Henry Collins. Christopher called. He knows about the adoption, wants to meet. Be careful, Rachel. Christopher was waiting at a small cafe in Sag Harbor, as far from his usual high-end haunts as he could get without leaving the Hamptons entirely. He'd chosen an outdoor table despite the heat and was nursing what looked like whiskey neat when I arrived. At 11 in the morning. Rachel. He didn't stand as I took the seat across from him. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot. Christopher, how did you find out? He took a long swallow of his drink. Dad's papers. After I saw your inheritance, I decided to look more carefully through his personal files. Found copies of the adoption records, the original birth certificate. His laugh was bitter. Turns out Dad was thorough about documentation, even for family secrets. A waitress approached and I ordered iced tea, waiting until she'd gone before continuing. I only found out myself 2 days ago. I had no idea. 52 years, he said, staring into his glass. 52 years of thinking you were my sister, my flesh and blood. His words stung more than I expected. I am your sister. Maybe not biologically, but that's exactly the point. He cut in. Biology matters. Blood matters. It's what makes a family a family. That's not true, and you know it. Family is about more than DNA. It's about history, shared experiences, love. Love? He looked up sharply. Is that what you think we had? One big, happy family? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. We were happy once, before Mom died, before you decided that business was more important than people. Easy for you to say. You weren't expected to carry on the Lawson legacy. The family name, the family business. He drained his glass and signaled for another. And now I find out you're not even a real Lawson. I'm every bit as much a Lawson as you are, I said, my temper flaring. I was raised by the same parents. I have the same memories, the same values. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're the interloper who somehow managed to steal my birthright. His voice had risen enough that nearby diners were glancing our way. Dad gave you that house. Mom's special project, apparently. He set up trusts for you that I never knew existed. And now I'm trapped in a mausoleum I can't even sell. The waitress returned with my iced tea and his second whiskey, casting a concerned look between us before retreating. Christopher, I didn't steal anything. Dad made his own decisions. If you have issues with those decisions, that's between you and him. He's dead. Yes. And before he died, he wanted to make sure both of us were taken care of, just in different ways. Christopher leaned forward, his voice low and tense. I want those papers. All of them. The adoption records, the birth certificates, everything you found. They belong to the family. They belong to me, I said firmly. They're about me, my identity, my history. Your fake history, your stolen identity. He stood abruptly, tossing bills on the table. I'll get those papers, Rachel, one way or another. And when I do, we'll see how secure your precious inheritance really is. As he stalked away, I realized I was shaking, not just with anger, but with a profound sadness. Whatever fragile connection might have remained between us seemed irrevocably broken. I finished my tea slowly, trying to collect myself before driving back to Southampton. Christopher's reaction wasn't entirely surprising. He'd always placed enormous value on the Lawson name, on legacy and bloodlines. Finding out I wasn't biologically part of that lineage had given him a new weapon, a way to delegitimize not just my inheritance, but my entire existence in the family. But beneath his anger, I'd sensed something else. Fear, perhaps, or loss. As if the discovery had erased even the few good memories he still had of our childhood together. When I got home, I called Henry Collins immediately. He threatened to get the adoption records, I told him after explaining the confrontation. He seemed to think they might invalidate my inheritance somehow. Henry sighed heavily. They won't. Your adoption was legal and properly documented. Edward and Anne were your legal parents, which makes you their legal heir. Christopher is grasping at straws. Still, I'm worried. He seemed unstable. I'll speak with him, Henry promised. In the meantime, make sure those papers are secure. And Rachel, you might want to consider accelerating your move to Serenity Hall. The property is better protected than your rental. After we hung up, I called the contractor who had given us the most reasonable estimate for the initial renovations. How quickly could you make the house minimally habitable? Just basic utilities, a functioning kitchen, that sort of thing. For a property that size, at least a month, and that's rushing it. What if money weren't an object? There was a pause. 3 weeks. Absolute minimum. And that's with multiple crews working overtime. Do it, I said, surprising myself with my decisiveness. Whatever it takes. I need to move in as soon as possible. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of decisions and activity. I resigned from my teaching position, promising to help find a replacement for the fall semester. Lily. And I packed our modest belongings, donating or selling what we didn't need. The renovation crews worked practically around the clock at Serenity Hall, restoring electricity, plumbing, and basic structural integrity to the main portions of the house. I didn't hear from Christopher directly, but Henry kept me informed of developments. Christopher had indeed consulted lawyers about challenging the will based on my adoption, but they'd advised him he had no case. He'd also attempted to sell the Bridgehampton estate to a developer, only to be reminded of the 5-year occupancy requirement. His frustration, according to Henry, was building dangerously. Be careful, Henry warned during one of his visits to check on the renovation progress. Christopher has always been volatile when he doesn't get his way. The day before our scheduled move, I made one final trip to Serenity Hall alone to check on the last-minute details. The house was still a work in progress, but the transformation was remarkable. The entry hall gleamed with polished wood, the kitchen boasted new appliances alongside carefully preserved vintage elements, and the library had been restored to its former warmth and elegance. As I was reviewing the upstairs bathroom renovations with the contractor, my phone rang. It was Lily. Mom? Her voice was tight with fear. Someone broke into the apartment, the boxes with all the adoption papers and Grandpa's letters. They're gone. I rushed home to find our apartment in disarray. Drawers emptied onto the floor, closets ransacked, and Lily sitting pale-faced on the couch with a police officer beside her. Are you hurt? I asked immediately, pulling her into a tight hug. She shook her head. I came home and found it like this. They only took those boxes from the attic, the ones with all your adoption papers and family stuff. The officer took my statement, but we both knew the chances of recovering the documents were slim. This wasn't a random break-in. It was targeted, and we both knew who was responsible. We're moving tonight, I told Lily after the police left. Pack whatever essentials you haven't already boxed up. We'll sleep at Serenity Hall, even if we have to use air mattresses. 3 hours later, we pulled through the iron gates of our new home, the headlights illuminating the freshly cleared driveway. The house looked different already. Less abandoned, more welcoming, with warm light spilling from windows that had been dark for decades. Home sweet home, Lily said with forced cheerfulness as we carried our overnight bags inside. The contractors had left that afternoon, having completed the essential renovations. The house smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, but beneath that was something older and more comforting, the scent of wood, and history and permanence. We made beds with newly purchased linens in what would become our bedrooms, and tried to settle in despite the tension of the day's events. I lay awake long after Lily had fallen asleep, staring at unfamiliar ceiling beams and listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house. Christopher had the papers now, the tangible proof of my adoption, of the original Rachel's, brief existence of my parents' secret. But what did he hope to gain? Henry had assured me my inheritance was secure legally. Was this just about hurting me? About erasing what little connection I had left to my parents' memory? The next morning brought rain again, a gentle summer shower that seemed to seal us into our new sanctuary. I made coffee in the renovated kitchen, still learning where everything was, and called Henry to update him on the break-in. This crosses a line, he said gravely. Breaking and entering is a criminal offense. Do you want me to speak with him? No, I said after a moment's thought. I think I need to face him myself. One last conversation. Rachel, I strongly advise against that. Christopher is not in a reasonable state of mind. Maybe not, but I can't hide from him forever. and I can't start my new life here with this hanging over us. After much discussion, Henry reluctantly agreed to arrange a meeting on neutral ground, his office with him present as a buffer. Christopher surprisingly accepted the invitation for that afternoon. "I don't want you going alone," Lily insisted when I told her my plans. "Henry will be there, and it's a law office with security and other staff around. I'll be fine." She frowned, looking so much older than her 16 years. "Promise you'll call me the second it's over." "I promise. Now, how about we make a list of furniture we need to order? The living room is looking pretty bare." The distraction worked, and we spent the morning planning and measuring, the domesticity of the task helping to ground us both after the turmoil of the previous day. At 2 o'clock, I pulled up to Henry's elegant colonial office building in East Hampton. Christopher's Tesla was already in the parking lot, gleaming expensively despite the drizzling rain. Henry met me at the door, his expression concerned. "He's already here. Rachel, you don't have to do this." "I know, but I want to." Christopher was standing at the window of Henry's office, looking out at the manicured gardens behind the building. He turned as I entered, and I was struck by how haggard he appeared. Unshaven, his normally immaculate clothing slightly rumpled. "You have my papers," I said, dispensing with pleasantries. He nodded toward a cardboard box on Henry's desk. "I made copies." "Of course you did." I sat down, not taking my eyes off him. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish, Christopher? Breaking into my home? Stealing my personal documents? Henry has already told you the adoption doesn't invalidate Dad's will. It's not about the will anymore." He finally sat as well, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's about the truth. Why they kept it secret. Why they chose you over me. They didn't choose me over you?" I said, genuinely confused. "They loved us both." He laughed bitterly. "Did they? Then why did Dad leave you the one place Mom actually cared about? Why did he set up trusts for you that I never knew existed? Why did he trap me in that mausoleum of a beach house while giving you freedom? Because you're the one who wanted the beach house. You're the one who always cared about appearances, about status. You got exactly what you always said you wanted. And you got what I didn't know to want," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "The heart of the family. The truth. The connection to Mom that I never had." I stared at him, suddenly seeing the situation from a completely different angle. This wasn't just about inheritance or biology. It was about a little boy who had lost his mother at a formative age and never quite recovered. "Christopher," I said more gently, "Mom loved you. Deeply. Her death wasn't about you, and neither was Dad's will. Then why did he punish me?" His voice cracked, and I saw with shock that there were tears in his eyes. "Why did he set me up to fail with that 5-year occupancy requirement? Why did he hide you from me all these years?" "Hide me? I was right there. I was always right there, trying to maintain some kind of family connection while you pulled further and further away." Henry, who had been silently observing, cleared his throat. "If I may, Edward spoke to me extensively about his decisions regarding both of you. The beach house and the 5-year requirement weren't a punishment, Christopher. They were an opportunity." Christopher looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He knew you valued appearances, status, the material trappings of success, but he also knew those things hadn't made you happy. The 5 years were meant to give you time to discover what truly mattered. Family, roots, connection, things he felt he'd failed to teach you himself. I reached for the box of documents, pulling out the letter I'd originally found at Serenity Hall. "Read this. Dad's letter to me. It might help you understand." Christopher hesitated, then took the letter. His expression changed as he read, moving from skepticism to something more complex. "As for the adoption," Henry continued, "Edward and Anne made that decision before you were old enough to understand. Then years passed, and they never found the right moment to reveal the truth. It was a mistake, one Edward deeply regretted at the end of his life." "You knew all along?" Christopher asked, looking up from the letter. Henry nodded. "I was their attorney when they arranged the adoption. It was private, legal, and final. Rachel is, in every legal and meaningful sense, your sister." Christopher was silent for a long moment, the letter still in his hands. "He says here you cared for him while I waited for him to die. Is that what he really thought of me?" The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. "I think he was trying to acknowledge the different roles we played at the end of his life. You managed his business affairs. I handled his personal care. Both were necessary. But he respected you more." We're staying. Maybe. Or maybe he just saw us clearly for who we are. Different people with different strengths. I leaned forward. Christopher, I don't want to fight with you anymore. We're the only family we have left. Biological or not, we shared the same parents, the same childhood memories. That means something. He folded the letter carefully and returned it to the box. I shouldn't have taken your papers. Or broken into your apartment. I was not thinking clearly. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Christopher it was significant. I know, I said, and I understand why finding out about the adoption was a shock. It was for me too. Have you thought about finding her? Your birth mother? The question surprised me. A little. I'm not sure. Why? He hesitated. There's something else in those papers. Something I found when I was going through them. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded envelope. This was in with Dad's correspondence. It's from 1998. I took the envelope. Inside was a letter from a woman named Margaret Keller, addressed to my father. Dear Mr. Lawson, I hope this letter finds you well. I've debated for months whether to write to you, but as my health declines, I feel compelled to reach out one last time. I've respected your family's privacy these past 25 years, as agreed when I placed my daughter in your care. I've never attempted contact, never interfered. I built a life for myself in California, married, had 2 more children who have blessed me with grandchildren. My doctors tell me I have less than a year. Pancreatic cancer, like my mother, before me. Before I go, I wanted to express my deepest gratitude for giving my daughter the life I couldn't provide at 19. I've thought of her every day, wondered about her, prayed for her happiness. I don't ask to meet her. I don't wish to disrupt the life and family she knows. But if someday, after I'm gone, she wishes to know about her birth family, please tell her she was born from love, given up with love, and thought of with love every day of my life. I've enclosed my contact information and that of my son, Thomas, who knows about his sister and would welcome her if she ever wished to connect. With deepest respect and gratitude, Margaret Keller. Tears blurred my vision as I reached the end of the letter. Another piece of my history, another connection I'd never known existed. There's a California address and phone number, Christopher said quietly, and a name, Thomas Keller. I looked him up. He still lives in San Francisco. He's a doctor. I looked up at my brother, confused by this unexpectedly helpful gesture. Why are you telling me this? He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. Because you deserve to know. Because family matters, even the parts we didn't know, existed. He paused. Because maybe I've been wrong about what makes a family a family. It wasn't a full reconciliation. There were too many years of distance, too many harsh words exchanged. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that whatever had divided us, we still shared a history that couldn't be erased. Thank you, I said simply. As we prepared to leave, Christopher hesitated at the door. That house, Serenity Hall. Mom loved it, didn't she? Yes, it was their first home, where they were happiest, according to Dad's letter. He nodded slowly. I might like to see it sometime, when it's restored. It was an olive branch, tentative but real. I'd like that, I said. You're always welcome, Christopher. You're still my brother. He didn't respond to that, but the slight nod he gave me held more acknowledgement than anything he'd offered in years. As I drove back to Serenity Hall, my mind was full of new possibilities. A half-brother in California I'd never known existed. A birth mother who had thought of me every day until her death, and the faint chance of reconnecting with the brother I'd grown up with. 6 months later, Serenity Hall stood transformed. The once overgrown gardens had been tamed and replanted according to old photographs we'd found in the attic. The exterior gleamed with fresh paint in the original colonial blue with crisp white trim. Inside, each room had been carefully restored, balancing historical accuracy with modern comfort. It was Thanksgiving, and I stood in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on dinner. Lily was setting the dining room table, humming along to music playing through the new sound system we'd installed. Do you think he'll actually come? She asked for the 3rd time, adjusting a flower arrangement in the center of the table. He said he would, I answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My relationship with Christopher remained fragile, a tentative rebuilding of something that had been broken for decades. We'd spoken several times by phone in the months since our meeting in Henry's office, each conversation slightly less strained than the last. I'd invited him to Thanksgiving dinner on impulse, not really expecting him to accept. When he did, adding that he'd be coming alone as he and Vanessa had separated in September. I'd been both pleased and terrified. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock. Christopher had always been punctual. "I'll get it," Lily called, and I heard her footsteps hurrying to the front door. There was a moment of awkward conversation in the foyer. Then Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Uncle Christopher's here. He brought wine and flowers." Christopher stood behind her, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater rather than his usual tailored suit, and held a bouquet of autumn flowers in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other. "The house looks amazing," he said. "You've done incredible work here." "Thank you. It's been a labor of love." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and took the flowers. "These are beautiful. They're from that little shop in Sag Harbor, the one Mom used to like." The fact that he remembered such a detail after all these years touched me deeply. "I know the one. I still go there sometimes." As I arranged the flowers in a vase, Christopher wandered around the kitchen, taking in the careful restoration work. "It's strange," he said. "I have no memory of this place, but it feels familiar somehow. Dad said you were only about 2 when they sold it. But there are photos of you here as a baby, if you'd like to see them." He nodded. "I would. Later, maybe." Dinner was initially awkward, with conversations starting and stopping in fits. Lily, bless her, carried much of the social burden, chattering about school and her friends and her plans to study architecture in college. "She's got the bug now," I explained. "After watching the restoration process, here, you could do worse than architecture," Christopher said to Lily. "It's a solid profession. Creative but practical." "That's what I thought," she agreed. "Plus, I love the idea of creating spaces that become part of people's stories, like this house." Gradually, the tension eased. The food was good, the wine better, and by dessert, Christopher had relaxed enough to ask about my search for my birth family. "I found Thomas, my half-brother," I told him. "We've exchanged emails and spoken on the phone a few times. He's coming to visit after Christmas with his wife and kids." "And he welcomed the connection? Just like that?" I nodded. "Apparently his mother, Margaret, told him about me when he was a teenager. He said he'd always hoped I might find them someday. That must be strange. Having a whole other family you never knew about." "It is," I admitted, "but also wonderful in its way. Thomas sent me photos of Margaret, my birth mother. I have her smile, apparently." "You do look nothing like the Lawsons," Christopher said, but there was no malice in his observation now. "How's the beach house?" I asked, changing the subject. "Still planning to stay the full 5 years?" Shadow crossed his face. "It's quiet, too big for one person. But yes, I'm staying. Dad was right about one thing. I need to figure out what I really value. I'm not sure the answer's in that house, but I'm giving it a chance." After dinner, while Lily cleared the table, I took Christopher on a tour of the fully restored Serenity Hall. He paused longest in what had been our parents' bedroom. Now, my own, taking in the antique furniture we'd found in storage and restored. "Dad's dresser," he said, running a hand along the polished mahogany. "I remember this from the beach house when we were kids. He must have taken it with them when they moved." I opened one of the drawers. "Look what I found inside when we were restoring it." I handed him a small velvet box. Inside was a man's wedding band, simple gold with an inscription, "To E, my harbor in every storm, A." "Dad's wedding ring," Christopher said softly. "I don't think I ever saw him without it, until the end, when his hands were so swollen they had to cut it off," I finished. "Mom kept it in her jewelry box after she died. I guess Dad put it in here when he was setting up this place for me." Christopher closed the box carefully and returned it to the drawer. "You know, when we were clearing out his office after the funeral, I found something strange. A journal where he'd been practicing writing with his left hand." He paused. The doctors had told him the cancer might affect his motor function. He was preparing, making sure he could still sign documents even if he lost control of his right hand. That sounds like Dad, always planning 3 steps ahead. He knew what was coming with the cancer, with all of it, and he still took the time to buy back this house, restore it, set up everything for you. Christopher's voice was thoughtful, free of the bitterness that had colored it for so long. "He must have really loved you." "He loved us both," I said gently, "just in different ways." We ended the evening in the library, where a fire crackled in the restored hearth. Lily had excused herself to call friends, leaving Christopher and me alone with coffee and the comfortable silence that had gradually replaced the tense one. "I filed for divorce last month," Christopher said suddenly. "Vanessa and it was over long before Dad died. We were just going through the motions. I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Don't be. It's been clarifying in a way. Makes you realize what matters." He looked around the warm room with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable chairs. "You've made a real home here." "We have," I agreed. "It's more than I ever thought I'd have." "Dad knew what he was doing," Christopher said with something like respect in his voice. "Giving you this place. Giving me time to figure things out. He understood us better than we understood ourselves." As Christopher prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. "Rachel, I've been thinking about selling the beach house. But the 5-year requirement, I know, I'd lose the proceeds. But maybe that's okay." He looked around at Serenity Hall one more time. "Some things are worth more than money." I hugged him. Then, for the first time in years. After a moment's stiffness, he returned the embrace, awkwardly at first, then with genuine warmth. "Happy Thanksgiving, Christopher." "Happy Thanksgiving, sis." After he left, I rejoined Lily in the library. She curled up beside me on the sofa, resting her head on my shoulder. "That went well," she observed. "Better than I expected." "Me too," I admitted. "Though, I'm not sure we'll ever be as close as we were as children. But it's a start, right?" "Yes," I said, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "It's a start." Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs and found myself drawn to the small room off the library that I'd converted into a home office. On the desk sat a framed photograph of my parents, Edward and Anne, standing in front of Serenity Hall when they were first married, young and smiling with their whole futures ahead of them. Beside it was a newer frame, holding the single photo I had of Margaret Keller, my birth mother, a woman with my smile and kind eyes, taken a few years before her death. And next to that, my favorite picture of Lily as a little girl, gap-toothed and beaming, her future still unwritten. 3. Generations of women connected by both blood and choice, by secrets and truths, by loss and discovery. I thought of all the revelations of the past year, learning about my adoption, discovering Serenity Hall, reconnecting with Christopher, finding Thomas. So many pieces of myself that had been missing without my even knowing they were gone. My father's final gift hadn't just been this house or financial security. It had been the truth, complicated, messy, but ultimately healing. He'd given me the chance to understand not just where I came from, but who I truly was. A daughter of 2 mothers, a sister by choice rather than blood, a parent carrying forward the best of those who came before me. I stood at the window, looking out at the gardens where new plantings promised spring blooms to come. The restoration of Serenity Hall wasn't just about bringing an old house back to life. It had been about restoring the broken pieces of my own history, creating something whole and beautiful from fragments that had seemed beyond repair. Christopher had been right about one thing. Dad knew exactly what he was doing when he divided our inheritance the way he did. He hadn't forgotten me or valued me less. He had seen me clearly, seen what I needed, what would help me grow, what would bring me peace. I thought I had been discarded. But in truth, I had been chosen. Not for wealth or status or the family name, but for something far more precious. The capacity to recognize that true inheritance isn't measured in square footage or bank accounts. It's measured in truth, in love that survives secrets, in the courage to rebuild what time and misunderstanding have broken. I had stood at a rusted gate 6 months ago, feeling abandoned and betrayed. Now I stood in a home filled with history and possibility, knowing that the key my father had left me unlocked not just a forgotten house, but the door to understanding my own heart. Some treasures aren't meant to be seen by everyone. Some truths take time to be revealed. And sometimes, what looks like being forgotten is actually being entrusted with something precious beyond measure.